I've been doing this whole game review routine for a couple of years now, and I understand that due to the very nature of reviewing games and gaming critique in general, there will always be at least some portion of my audience that will not entirely agree with everything I say in any given video. And in the overwhelming number of cases, that doesn't really bother me at all, because I entirely understand that we live in a wide world and everyone's going to have their own preferences and expectations. That said, for the past 2 years, I've found it downright hilarious that of all my review videos, of all the ones I've ever produced, one of the ones that has gotten the most aggressive backlash is my original coverage of The Walking Zombie 2. Now, in hindsight, I believe a decent portion of the criticism I initially got was mostly, if not entirely, justified. I had such a horrible experience with the game originally that I ultimately played only a small portion of it before giving up, and if I'm going to call myself a reviewer, it's only proper that I actually make a substantial effort to play as much of the game as I can before giving my final opinion on it, even if it's a game I originally hated. I don't believe in taking review videos down, especially since I still think most of my opinions in my first video were justified, so the only other reasonable solution available to me is to go back in with a more open mind. The Walking Zombie 2 is a first-person shooter game designed, I strongly suspect, via Unity engine, but we'll get more to talking about that later. It has a very colorful polygon art style, and its gameplay generally conforms to an almost exclusively linear structure, although there are a handful of very specific instances of open-world gameplay. Similar to most RPGs, players play through a number of individual quests and earn both experience points and in-game money to spend on resources via specific in-game vendors and through the player's UI interface. The game does market itself as having this integral story, tying everything together, and while that's technically true, it's true only from a certain point of view. You play as this messiah-like character who just so happens to be seemingly the one person who appears to be completely immune to the infectious nature of zombie bites. And you might think, what would the rest of your survivor community want you to do upon discovering this? Answer A, they send you to a research facility to turn your blood into a cure, a la The Last of Us. Answer B, you find yourself the object of cult-like worship, like what's-his-name from Far Cry 5. Or answer C, everyone gladly risks your life, making you fetch and carry for them non-stop. If your answer was C, then you were absolutely correct. The only savior of the zombie apocalypse, humanity's one last hope of continued survival in the face of societal destruction, reduced to running back and forth on petty fetch quests. Honestly, if the developers had an even somewhat competent writer on their team, this would probably be an excellent opportunity for some self-aware dry humor, and that's probably one of the first negatives and probably one of the most mild negatives I'll have on this list here. The writing isn't horrible, but it's so insanely simplistic with almost middle school level complexity that it often feels like it's talking down to the player, but not in, I think, a condescending way. I want to be clear that I'm not detecting malice from the developer towards the players, like maybe he thinks players are too stupid and need to be condescended to. That's not what I'm saying. Many other games do that, like Outriders, for example. I don't know if English isn't the developer's native language or if he didn't bother writing something more substantial, but most of the cutscenes and NPC interactions definitely could have used some kind of overhaul, as it currently feels so utterly lifeless. And this isn't helped by the fact that nearly all the characters in the game, if not every single one, are given basically the exact same text-to-speech voice. And it's not even a good text-to-speech AI. A lot of words are pronounced very awkwardly, with strange emphasis placed improperly on certain words without any explainable context. And there tend to be excessively long pauses in the delivery that a human probably wouldn't do, at least assuming that they weren't Alan Rickman. We'll give him a pass. I've dragged in almost half a dozen friends of mine to bear witness to the beyond embarrassing cutscenes, and the reaction in every single case was identical. What the hell is this? And I honestly can't say I have any real answer for them or for you. The missions themselves tend to differ quite extensively in terms of originality and quality, but none of them are good. At best, they range from painfully mediocre to at worst being downright half-assed nonsense. Some of the gems, if you would, include a few treasure hunting missions, where kind of like Sea of Thieves, you have to find and dig up buried treasure, all the while fighting off the random assortment of zombies guarding the general area. There isn't really any tracking or puzzle solving to be found here, you just start digging around the general area until you dig up whatever it is you're looking for. There's a little vague red line giving you a basic indication of where the treasure supposedly is, but it's incredibly unhelpful and unreliable. But hey, it was a nice change of pace. Similarly, my favorite type of mission was where I would be sent to scour through this fallout shelter-like vault, with a mix of long, tight corridors, square, medium-sized rooms, and a few simplistic atmospheric puzzles. You would go into this facility like 4 or 5 different times on different missions, in quick succession, returning each time to talk to one of your NPC buddies who would reward you for clearing that specific section of the level. And I say that was my favorite in the sense of it was probably the least boring set of levels I ever played through in this game. Traveling in The Walking Zombie 2 is one of those mechanics where you won't really pay much attention to it during your first few hours playing, but later on it proves to be an almost insurmountable barrier that is inherently designed with the active intention of exploiting the player base wherever possible. What I didn't mention earlier, because I wanted to specifically draw attention to it here, is that The Walking Zombie 2, as was the case with its predecessor, is a port of the original mobile game. I believe at this point, with both the mobile and PC versions of The Walking Zombie 2 are developed alongside one another by the same developer. Now, there are an increasing number of mobile to PC games that at least make some vague attempts to hide the fact that their microtransactions are their bread and butter, by ensuring that even free-to-play players can play the game for however long they like without being forced to buy in. Genshin Impact is one such good example of this, mostly. Is Genshin Impact exploitative to some degree? Absolutely, but if you're not willing to spend money on the game, at least in most cases you can grind away for whatever it is you want instead. Here in The Walking Zombie 2, however, the game will literally prevent you from playing any farther until you cough up some amount of money, or else be forced to wait several hours before being allowed to continue playing for free. And as if this isn't bad enough, the game spams you with an overwhelming number of pop-up windowed ads, not only when you're in the shop, where you can buy stuff with either in-game money or real-life money, but also during the normal gameplay. I've had the game harass me with unnecessary quote-unquote limited-time offers in between missions when I'm using the world map to travel from one location to the other. I get that in a free-to-play game, to a certain degree, you want to incentivize people to choose to pay to support the game. I don't oppose that in theory. What I find myself in opposition to is how The Walking Zombie 2 has ham-fistedly forced in these unacceptably intrusive measures. And if you think by spending $20 or maybe $10 if it's on sale, by buying that Mega Pack edition of the game, which basically breaks the game by entirely removing the aforementioned fuel component, which limits the number of missions a player can go on before facing a timed cooldown, then you get a free pass from being bombarded with the in-game advertisements. No, you're dead wrong. There's probably at least $100 worth of item bundles and supposedly limited time premium offers the game will still try to push down your throat. No game, let alone one of this incredibly small scope and shitty quality, should be pushing this degree of monetization on the player. The RPG mechanics, specifically in regards to player leveling and upgrading, are overall quite decent, but as with the game in general, suffers from having an unbelievably ugly and poor constructed user interface. I know most AAA games, for example, suffer from not daring to be all that innovative in terms of how they handle character upgrades. They all seem to copy-paste the exact same spider's web UI design for the upgrade screen itself, and basically 2/3 of the items on it are just passive stat increases, but at least you have everything spread out in front of you in at least somewhat visually appealing way. Here you just scroll up and down as if you're reading a large clump of digital text, which is basically all you're doing. The one aspect that can single-handedly make or break your FPS game is slow, clunky, and frankly overall very, very boring. Just in order to play most of the game so I could do this complete review, or near complete review, I would often find myself listening to YouTube videos in the background, simply to pass the time because I was lacking any degree of immersion or investment in what I was playing. It was really just your basic slow-paced, point-and-click gunplay. Just like any other game with shitty gunplay, the metagame, if you will, revolved around you lining up the same dumb-as-fuck AI in a straight line while you run backwards a bit until you're a dozen or so meters away and then you just pick them all off one by one with headshots. At the predictable swaying pace they commit to, even a player with terrible aim should have no trouble getting at least some decent headshots here. What doesn't help is that there really isn't all that much in terms of enemy variety. Sure, cosmetically there might be a fair amount of difference, you could say, between zombie models, but it takes more than swapping out the clothes on a zombie model to make said zombie interesting. Similar to Left 4 Dead 2, you have your basic Charger, Spitter, and Common Infected, but that's pretty much the end of it. You do in a handful of specific instances get to go up against specific bosses in these scripted sequences, but these fights are usually fairly underwhelming, as they mostly just involve dodging out of the way during that boss's AoE and projectile attacks, which they do on a predictable 10 or 15 second interval, and use the time in between these attacks to launch your own more lengthy bullet-filled counterattack. It's all perfectly functional as a series of boss fights, but nothing remotely interesting. I mentioned before how there were a few levels scattered here and there that had at least halfway decent objectives, and this is still true. However, they're seemingly outnumbered by at least 10 to 1 by missions that all revolve around the same handful of tropes, such as standing over a highlighted point of interest or a set of linear points of interest until an on-screen bar pops up and completes, and rinse and repeat this over and over again until the mission is declared to be over. Or you have the typical go here and retrieve X item from Y defined location quest. And once you pick up the item, the mission instantly ends. Or even better, you have the kill all zombies in the area mission, and each and every one of these missions are insanely short. I could probably complete any one of these missions in less than 5 minutes, with a decent chance of probably finishing them in less than 2 minutes. There's nothing of substance to any of them. It's not often that if I show off a single game, any game really, to the dozen or so friends I usually play games with and talk about games with, that all of them come to the same exact conclusion. It takes something really special for them to veer away from their usual stance of general indifference or apathy. And The Walking Zombie 2 is special, albeit so special that if it was a person it would fail special ed classes by being too special even for the teacher kind of way. Yeah, at least when it comes to the text-to-speech voice acting, the half-assed story held together with scotch tape and cocaine, and honestly the very generic art style and animation that looks like something you'd find on Newgrounds, I'm almost willing to give it a pass, partially. It's like the Batman and Robin of gaming. You're going to have strong feelings on it one way or the other if you force yourself to play it long enough. What makes it a bad game for me isn't mainly all that, but the fact that the FPS mechanics and level design are asset flip degrees of unredeemable garbage, where 90% of your time in-game will be spent playing the same exact 5 or 6 mission objectives over and over and over and over again, often on the same exact maps, and the fact that it's monetized to hell and back to a completely unjustified degree wraps it all up with a bow tie of what the fuck. Overall, it may shock you to discover that I do not recommend this game. It's a low-effort mobile port that oftentimes makes Raid Shadow Legends look like a top-tier game by comparison. Is it without any redemptive qualities? No, of course not. But quite simply, there is no way in hell I'm giving this game a thumbs up. It may not be the absolute worst game I've ever played, but it's a long way indeed from being considered remotely worthwhile. If you have the misfortune to see The Walking Zombie 2 show up in your Steam recommended feed, my advice would be to click that little not interested button and walk away. Or now I'm hearing that apparently The Walking Zombie 2 is now coming to PS4 and PS5. I'm sorry, PlayStation users, we tried to contain this idiocy to first mobile and then PC. Sadly, we lost the fight on both fronts, and it's storming its way towards your digital gates now. This shit heap is your problem now, and I wish you the best of luck in sending it to its overdue grave. As ever, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the like button and comment below what you think of the game. Comments really help my videos get boosted in the algorithm, and plus I read and respond to nearly all the comments I get. So even if you want to drop a comment just to say hi or get my opinion on something, even if it's unrelated, I'll be more than happy to chat with you there. Likewise, subscribing and clicking the bell really helps. I know it's cliche, but the YouTube algorithm is a pain in the ass to deal with, doubly so when you're a small channel like I am. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome everybody, stay safe, and peace out.